Hello and welcome back to Today's Take, the podcast that goes beyond the headlines to unpack the story behind the story you see on TV. I'm Jane Azzopardi and this week we're heading to China. Anthony Albanese has hailed talks with President Xi Jinping a success after meeting with the Chinese leader. Live now to Today Federal Politics reporter Liz Daniels, who's in Beijing. Liz, what did they discuss?
Jane, it was wide-ranging, but the Chinese very much this morning cozying up to Australia in the face of looming trade tariffs from the US. Anthony Albanese also raised thorny issues with President Xi in that meeting that went for more than an hour yesterday afternoon, talking about the case of detained Australian writer Young Hung Jun and also Chinese military aggression off our coast. But it was clear from the Chinese side and from President Xi's comments that he wants to continue developing this friendship with Australia.
No matter how the international landscape may evolve, we should uphold this overall direction unswervingly.
Those comments about the international landscape clearly directed at looming trade tariffs, as I said, from the United States. Last night for Anthony Albanese, it was a night of Chinese grandeur in the Grand Hall of the People. He also met with Premier Li and other dignitaries from the Communist Party, and with a ceremonial guard as well. Jane, quite clear here in China, Anthony Albanese's ability to have removed those trade barriers is being welcomed and encouraged to go further.
So, what is this trip really about? What does the Prime Minister hope to achieve beyond the photo ops and the diplomatic niceties? And when he's standing next to President Xi, should we really be seeing Donald Trump's shadow lurking in the background? To help us dissect all of this, we have one of Australia's sharpest political minds with us today, Nine political editor Charles Croucher. Charles, welcome to Today's Take.
Hey Jane, thank you. Great to be here.
Well, I mean, I love chatting to you about anything politics in the corridors of Channel 9, so I'm pleased that we're getting this one on the record. First of all, I want you to bring us up to speed. What exactly has the Prime Minister been up to this week?
Yeah, so a three-stop trip to China, starting in Shanghai, the real economic hub of China, then to Beijing, which is the administrative capital and the capital. He met with President Xi there, as well as the Prime Minister, the leader Li, and then the chairman of the party as well. So they're the three most significant figures in China. Obviously, President Xi is by far and away the most significant. And the fact that he's having photo ops and having sit-downs, the Prime Minister, is a big step forward from where things have been in the last 5 years. So that's been the first two steps. Today, he is in the southwest of China, an area renowned for pandas. He's there doing the panda diplomacy side of things, but also showing off some of the medical technology that Australia and China have collaborated with as a sign of some of the relationships that have prospered between Australia and China and the benefit towards both countries. And something the Prime Minister started saying more often this trip is not just benefiting our two countries, but the region and the world, which is a bit of a pivot from where he's been in the past. So, look, a 6-day trip is a long trip for Anthony Albanese. I've been on a few of these with him, and rarely do you spend 6 days in one country, but it's a sign of just the security that he has in his position post the election, but also the significance he places on this relationship in particular.
Yeah, I mean, almost a week in another country is not common for a Prime Minister. So what is the message that he's trying to send with this trip, Charles, like both to Beijing and also to the Australian public?
Yeah, I can't think of any time where Anthony Albanese spent that long just in one country. He spent a lot of time in India, but travelled around and then moved on. The UK following the death of the Queen, maybe, but this is a long time in China. Now, that message to China is that Australia is a secure partner, again, that this is someone you can trust and rely on when it comes to trade, following 5 pretty turbulent years. Subtly, I think there is a message, perhaps to America as well, that Australia is still a partner with China and will continue to promote free trade, which is what this is all about, with partners regardless of sort of who they are, at a time when America is doing the exact opposite.
Okay, we are going to get to America and the so-called elephant in the room there in a moment, but in terms of China, it's obviously Australia's biggest trading partner, but it's also one that we're quite wary of. So I want you to try and sum up for our listeners the relationship between our two countries and some of the complexities involved.
Yeah, it's so difficult to try and walk those two paths. There's an economic path and a military path. Now, economically, through trade, we are tied to China unlike any other country. The amount of trade that goes through China is sort of incomparable because there is no other country with the same amount, and you have to start adding countries together to get anywhere near it, particularly with things like iron ore, which is worth so much to the Australian economy, some of our coal. We've learnt through the last few years the importance of things like beef and crayfish and wine to the Chinese market and to Australia as well. So economically, we rely on China probably more than we should, given how complex the world might be. But if they're still writing the checks, then Australia's still going to cash them. Militarily, it's very different, and the problem going on now is as China expands outwards and continues to talk about expanding both its influence and its reach into places like the Pacific, getting real close to our shores, and then physically expand into Taiwan, as President Xi has made clear he wants to do at some point, then that starts to go against this rules-based order that so much of Australia and the world has flourished under. And that's where America comes into it, because at the same time, America has long seen the Pacific as being its domain, both through physical military installations in Australia, in the Philippines and other places stretching to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, obviously American territory, but other places around the Pacific. So they see the importance of the shipping lanes that flow through this area, and that's also where Australia becomes an important partner as well. So how do you have those two tracks? Economic, money, military and power. You don't want those to cross, and that's where they've been in recent times, and with the world so volatile, it's where they might end up again.
Yeah, there's also been a lot of coverage this week about those live firing exercises that China did off Australia's coast, I think it was last year, and Anthony Albanese raising that and trying to get some sort of promise from China that we'd get warning next time, which he didn't get. Is that a problem, or is that sort of something that you're unlikely to get China saying, oops, sorry, in any case?
Yeah, they're not going to do that. Look, who knows what was said behind closed doors. Publicly facing China won't give you that guarantee, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Circumnavigating Australia is provocative. There's no other way of seeing it. China knows that. They knew that we would know the ships are there, and we'd be tracing them as well. So it's an indication, it's an aggressive move. We've seen similar things in the South China Sea, in amongst the Philippines. There's been this increased aggressive actions both on sea and in the air by the PLA and by China. I guess from my point of view, what meetings like this week do is at least keeps that phone line open between the leaders, so that if something were to go wrong, if one of the lower ranking members of the People's Liberation Army in China were to take a risk, make a wrong move, and really do something provocative, heaven forbid kill someone in an Australian uniform or an American uniform, that mistake wouldn't turn into all-out war. There'd be a way of talking people back. Now, if that were to happen, it's going to be very hard for any Western leader to ignore. And we know there have been attacks on Australian troops, certainly nothing that's resulted in people being killed, but people being injured with divers and the likes in the last couple of years. So we're getting closer and closer to that. If we can have the dialogue channel open, that will prevent an accident, or being a tragic accident, becoming all-out war, because that's when things get really bad in the region, and that flows through to Australia as well.
So is that kind of what the Prime Minister's trying to achieve this week? Let's stay friends, let's sell you lots of things, and let's just keep the peace?
Yeah, I guess, and try and keep them in the tent in some way too. Try and both legitimise China as a growing power and a power that wants to expand and do things, while also seeing the benefit to our region. You know, China has seen this emerging middle class, much like India. This huge middle class has emerged that will take the country forward. Now, what Australia and America and the West seems to believe is if you show them freedom, democracy and all the goods that come with capitalism, maybe they will start to turn and expect that from their leaders. So far in China, that hasn't happened, and it's been the real correction to every other country where it has. So, look, yeah, I mean, China's going to expand outwards whether we sell them coal and iron ore or not. So we may as well sell them coal and iron ore, and we may as well talk to them the whole time as well. That's the other thing. If you can prevent something happening through dialogue, then so be it. on the same note, we've been a loyal, responsible, respectful ally to America for generations, and they're the ones putting tariffs on Australian goods, not China.
Yes.
So it's an upside-down world at the moment, and that's a strange path that the Prime Minister has to walk.
Yeah, and in terms of our relationship with China and getting what we want from China, from the outside, I mean, in terms of population, in terms of military, it seems so unequal. How much leverage do we really have?
We don't have a huge amount of leverage, but also Australia is still a big player in the Pacific. We have long been, in many cases, the big brother or the sibling to some pretty important shipping lanes and areas throughout our region. We are really important to America just for geography. You know, if they can place Marines in the Northern Territory, they can have satellite installations and receptors throughout Australia. There's a submarine base that's going in West Australia where US nuclear submarines can dock. That becomes vital if there is conflict or increased tensions in the region. It becomes an asset for the US as well. So look, Australia geographically has a lot of value to both countries, and then also we have the resources that are valuable to both countries as well, not just iron ore that China relies on for the steel that they build their cities and so much out of, but also the critical minerals we'll hear more about that become important for things like batteries, solar panels, other things, chips and the like that are going to be important moving forward. So I think the US know the value of Australia both as partners, having fought alongside our troops so often, but also geographically know the value of Australia. And you look at something like the Quad Alliance that has only popped up recently, but is a huge value. Japan, Australia, India, the United States. The one thing they have in common, apart from being democracies, is that they are sort of in and around the Pacific, the proximity to China, and have, in some cases, particularly India and Japan, this long and ongoing rivalry of sorts with China as well. So that's the old US way. You gather together allies and then you confront a problem, be it the Soviet Union post, the World War II, be it Germany in World War II or earlier than that as well. It's always been about gathering allies and then going somewhere. That's what the Quad's about. How Australia fits in this new world order, I don't know.
Okay, we'll have Donald Trump into the chat soon, but just in terms of this visit, it's obviously been big news here in Australia. We've seen pictures of Anthony Albanese walking along the Great Wall of China. There's been all these impressive-looking meetings that he's had with Chinese leaders. Is his visit making any headlines there? How is the Chinese media reporting it?
Yeah, the Chinese media have sort of spoken about some of the problems that still exist between Australia and China. The decision by the Australian government to block Huawei, a Chinese-based telecommunications company, from being involved in our 5G network is still something that they're reasonably upset about. The big sticking point at the moment is a Chinese-based company called Landbridge, who owns or leases the port of Darwin. A decision made 10 odd years ago that the government went to the election. In fact, both sides went to the election saying they would overturn. The question now is, how do you overturn it? What's the process that has the Chinese-backed company sell that to either an Australian company, an American company? That's still being worked out. So that's the bit that's been picked up in some of the Chinese media. The other thing, as a reminder of sort of just how big China is now and as a flex on the rest of the world, is when there are days when President Xi goes through and meets heads of state, it wasn't just Anthony Albanese that was there at the Great Hall of the People. The same day and just earlier on, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was there earlier that day. So that shows perhaps the sticking point that China is going through as well, that they've got to appease their old allies, sometimes foes, sometimes competitor, but right now they're probably closest friend on the global stage in Russia, while also nodding to Australia and seeing the value of capitalism and how far it's got them and got their people out of poverty in the last few decades.
It is so interesting what is happening geopolitically at the moment. I want to get a sense from you too, what it's like travelling with the Prime Minister on a trip like this. Like, how much information is the press pack given? How easy or difficult is it to get around? And like, what kind of real access do you have, particularly in a country like China? Yeah, China's hard to get it. You're all on burner phones, using burner laptops on the advice of security authorities, both at your
your employer, like Nine, and also coming from the federal authorities here in Canberra as well. Access is sometimes limited. These trips you're often staying in the same hotels, so you see the Prime Minister out and about, but then it's China, so there's always this ring of protection that goes around. You often won't know a schedule until the morning of, so you're trying to work around that. It's buses and planes and you're all over the place. The funny part about China used to be that wherever you'd go, there'd probably 2 or 3 men in tracksuits that would follow you with a long lens camera.
Right.
They were working in some way for the Chinese government, taking photos. Now that doesn't exist anymore over there. Or the last couple of times I've been there, it doesn't. It's all CCTV. And there are cameras on every corner. So they're monitoring, you assume they're monitoring what you're doing, what you're saying on phones and things, and you have to react accordingly. But at the same time, you report. Now, this happened early in the week when the press pack, including Liz Daniels and Ben Patrick, who are Nine's people over there, were reporting in Beijing at one of the known monuments there and got surrounded by security because effectively people aren't usually allowed to go there and film. Now, they had all the permission from both the Chinese government, from the Australian Embassy, but because it was so unusual, you still saw the heavy hand that China can act with in action there, surrounding the press pack, not letting on the bus. Now, it was all sorted. I think it took 30, 40 minutes or so, but it's that kind of reminder that this isn't like Australia. It's not like the United States. There isn't that freedom of the press, and mostly what operates over there is very strict, very controlling, and very government approved, unlike here. And I think that's a good reminder for everyone who we're dealing with as well.
Oh, and with that in mind, you know, we are getting all these wonderful photo opportunities and press conferences about what happened during the meetings. But how much else do you think is going on that we're not told about? Anything? Or?
Oh, there'd be lots going on, and lots in the background between the departments that have sorted this before the Prime Minister's arrival. Most things would be preordained and pre-organised. And then probably lots going on security-wise, as Australia's security team. For example, the Prime Minister's plane has to sit somewhere, and I would imagine that there'd be security personnel from the Australian RAAF that would stay with the plane. They're not going to let that out of their sights. So there's a lot of that stuff that goes on just to protect something like the plane, and then you move on, like the Prime Minister's room. They'd assumed it would be swept and checked for bugs and all the rest, so that'd be protected as well. It's a real operation going to China, and I think they're all living through it now, which is, I guess, another indication, the fact that they're there for 6 days, of how important the Prime Minister sees the trip as.
Absolutely. Okay, we might have got to the point now where Donald Trump enters the chat. Taiwan. I have read a lot about this issue this week, but I'm hoping you can explain it for us and our listeners a bit more. What does the US want from us in relation from Taiwan? What does China want from us? And what is our actual position?
Yeah, so China wants us to stay out and not comment on anything to do with Taiwan. They believe Taiwan is part of China. They think that is part of a unification strategy that they will see come back to them at some stage in this term of President Xi's leadership. So that's been a pretty well-stated goal. America publicly say they will defend Taiwan. They say it's an independent nation and that it's working with a diplomatic leader and separately to China altogether. Now, what has become an issue in the last week, and probably not coincidentally, this has become an issue because the White House has wanted it to become an issue, is given America are going to sell us some of their Virginia-class nuclear submarines, we're the first or second nation behind Britain that they will actually sell a submarine to. Eldridge Colby, one of the men who's doing the review into the AUKUS submarine pact, effectively has said he wants some guarantee from Australia that if China were to invade Taiwan, as is their stated goal, that Australia would send help and probably send the nuclear subs, if we have them, to be part of some kind of protection. Now, Australia hasn't said what we'll do. Australia has said effectively our position remains the same. We don't want to see any change in the current status quo. And that's probably what you'd expect. I didn't expect Anthony Albanese to come out or Richard Marles to come out and say, yep, we'd be there, we'd back and commit to some kind of conflict sight unseen. It's not what the opposition would have done, and they've made that clear as well. So this was a promise that I think America wanted Australia to make while knowing we probably wouldn't make, but just a reminder, again, from the US coming through some pretty unusual channels that we're still their friend more than the Chinese, and there's still these conflict points that could become a problem later on. It's part of the tricky makeup. And for Australia, you're not going to commit to something that hasn't happened when it's going to cost you skin either way. It's a really tough position to be in. It's the same position a lot of our governments have been in. This isn't a Labor or Liberal thing. It's a reality that one day we may face. But until then, there'll be contingency plans. We certainly wouldn't be telling anyone about them.
So does that mean that Washington has been watching this visit in China very closely? And what do you think they're making of it?
You bet. They definitely will be watching it. Look, Washington has a trust for Australia. That's clear, even in this age of tariffs and things. The fact that Australia has a 10% tariff, it's lower or as low as anyone in the world, is an indication that there's still that trust there. However, Washington has concerns that if they're going to start selling some of these precious nuclear submarines, the most precious jewel in their crown of the defence, they want guarantees that it's going to work for them. And they don't want to sacrifice their own nuclear subs if they can't produce enough to be then selling them off to others. So, look, they're watching. I'm sure, look, there'd be discussions amongst the Five Eyes, intelligence partners, that is Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK and the US. They'd be talking about it as well. Yeah, they're watching. Australia will know what their position is, don't make any mistake about it, but also we'll be making the same point that we've got to sell them stuff to keep our economy going. If we're going to sell them the iron ore that helps pay for those submarines to defend democracy, freedom, whatever it is, then so be it. Particularly when we're trying to sell to the United States and they're putting tariffs on things, and that's why there's been a lot of mention of things like free trade agreements and the need to remove tariffs to free up things. For a nation of 27 million people, we don't have the manpower or the money power to defend ourselves in that kind of conflict unless there's money coming in from elsewhere.
Well, you kind of referred to it, I think it was as an upside down world earlier when you spoke about the tariff difference. So there has been a lot of this commentary this week around how cosy, if you like, this relationship appears between Anthony Albanese and President Xi. And the Prime Minister still hasn't had that meeting with Donald Trump. Is it fair to be making that comparison?
Look, it's a reasonable comparison to make. The thing that's often overlooked in this is that the Prime Minister flew to Canada to have that meeting with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump went home. Now, it's understandable why he went home. You know, the US are about to roll out a strike on Iran. That's clearly a big issue, but it's not through want of trying that Australia hasn't had this meeting. I don't think the relationship is in a bad way with the United States. The tariff showed that. Yes, there are tariffs on Australian products which we haven't had in the past and don't expect, but it's certainly not higher than any other country. If there's some other country that had done a deal, of all these deals Donald Trump talks about, if some country had done a deal and removed tariffs altogether, well, now we've got a problem, because all of a sudden our products are competing on an uneven playing field against Brazilian or South African or Japanese products. They're not. At the moment, we're advantaged against all three of those competitors to us. Even with Indonesia this week, lots of celebration about a big deal between Prabowo and Donald Trump. Well, Indonesian products still cop a 19% tariff, ours are 10%, so you'd rather be the Australian seller in that relationship. However, the simple fact that President Xi and Prime Minister Albanese have met before President Trump and Prime Minister Albanese raises eyebrows, I don't think it's a bigger deal as we're perhaps making out it is, but one of those things where time will tell. In 6 months' time, if they still haven't met and things are really frosty, we could look back and say, well, we should have known 6 months ago, and I could be wrong. But I suspect at some stage in August, September, at the latest October, there's a series of summits, plus the chance for the Prime Minister just jump on his plane and head to Washington and have this meeting with President Trump that might be able to put things back on the right track. We'll wait to see what happens with tariffs. We'll wait to see what happens with the AUKUS submarine review, and that might give us a better indication of just the state of the relationship, more so than the fact that they haven't met or they've had 2 phone calls. There seems to be a fairly relaxed attitude here in Canberra, and then people who would know, Joe Hockey, Arthur Sinodinos, those that have been in the room, they seem less concerned than perhaps some of the commentators are.
Okay, well, the opposition is certainly upping that commentary. Here's National Senator Matt Canavan on the Today Show on Wednesday.
Does it feel as though Australia's got a better relationship with China at the moment than the US?
Well, look, I think that's seemingly what the Prime Minister wants. That's about the only conclusion you can make from his activities as PM. 6 days in China and not even time to go and visit our most important friend and ally in DC. I mean, there's no doubt that Donald Trump would meet with Anthony Albanese. He meets with everybody. He's met with presidents from Africa, from all over the world. I think the Prime Minister's just scared. Yeah. He's scared of going into the West Wing. He's scared of going into the Oval Office.
Donald Trump's not scary. Come on.
He doesn't know if he can handle it. He don't know if he can handle the heat.
Charles, is the PM scared?
I don't think he's scared. Again, he flew to Canada to have that meeting. Now, it's an intimidating presence, Donald Trump in the first place. Donald Trump in the Oval Office, again, even more intimidating. I think, having seen what Scott Morrison, the ride he went through back when he visited, now there was clearly a good relationship between the two of them. But you can't just show up in DC with a boombox and stand outside the White House and expect a meeting. Now, should they have organised it? I don't know. Maybe. It's been a long time since Parliament last sat. There was an election to get through and the like. But it's also a reminder, and I think something that our officials are pretty keen to put out there, it's a reminder that the relationship's still going strong, that Australia is still of great value to the United States. I mentioned the Marines, plus the surveillance, plus the West Australian submarine base. There'll be one on the East Coast as well. Our products have done better since the tariffs came on. Australian beef has sold in increasing rates in the United States. Now, part of that is because it's excellent quality and they need our beef for things like hamburgers, because the beef over there is too fatty, so they need Australian to, it's a whole process. The other part is our natural competitors in the export market are places like Japan and Brazil and South Africa, and their tariff rates are higher than ours. So we've actually got an advantage there. Right. Now, in 5 years' time, when American stock and American producers get their herds up and can compete with us, maybe things go bad. For now, things are okay on that tariff front, and on the diplomatic front. Again, at any moment the thread could be pulled, and all of a sudden, who knows, Canada have a 0% tariff or something like that, and we're back in a bad spot again. Or that the AUKUS submarine pact, that review that Elbridge Colby is doing, could be torn up, and then we're in trouble because we've invested time and money and the opportunity cost of going down the US nuclear submarine path. At the moment, Australia seems to be walking that fine line. Now, it's still fine, it can still fall, but things aren't quite as drastic or as bad yet as they could be.
So right now, I've heard the phrase diplomatic tightrope, diplomatic dance a lot this week in this upside down world. You think Anthony Albanese has been navigating things as best as he can?
I think he's doing okay. I think America has clearly said they value the Pacific, and if you want a big player in the Pacific who's a friend, it's Australia. Australia has great ties to Indonesia. That's going to become important if this conflict emerges between the world's two biggest powers in China and the US. We have great influence over places like Fiji. That becomes important if there's that conflict. Australia's using things, China has money and infrastructure that they can build. Australia hasn't got the money to match China. That's why you see something like the Papua New Guinea Rugby League team coming to the NRL. The importance the Prime Minister placed on that Australia-Fiji rugby test a couple of weeks ago in Newcastle. That's sort of part of our approach to the Pacific, and I think the US recognises that. We share intelligence. The AUKUS pact is important to the US. That's why they're sharing their knowledge and some of the best engineering they have. The Quad's important to them. The Five Eyes, we're sort of the central pillar of all of those. So look, the US is turning inwards. It's America first, that's clear. But Australia is still amongst a group of countries that's running second in Donald Trump's eyes. Okay. As long as we're there, we're probably advantaged, albeit not the same kind of sort of privilege or relationship that was there under President Biden, certainly, but also President Obama, who made the first pivot to the Pacific and started this process.
And thank goodness for rugby league. It sounds like, China's got the money, we've got
Always
the rugby league.
Yeah.
Finally, Charles, the trip's nearly over. He'll be heading back to Canberra. And finally, Parliament will resume next week. What is the Prime Minister walking into?
It's been an awfully long time since Parliament has been
2 months or
back.
something.
Yeah, it is. The longest time since 2016. We had that awfully long election that Malcolm Turnbull called. Look, the Prime Minister's walking into a majority. It's a new reality here in Canberra. He has a thumping majority in the lower house. so he's not as worried about a by-election or a state election as perhaps he was last term. He's also walking into an upper house in the Senate where Labor plus the coalition means things pass, or Labor plus the Greens means things pass. You don't need to negotiate as much with the crossbench, even though it's nice to have them as well. So it's a new sort of freedom, a security in his job, the legitimacy that comes with that thumping election win. So he's perhaps not looking over his shoulder as Labor Prime Ministers have needed to do in the past 15 years. And then the reality, cost of living is still high. That still needs to be worked out. One of the first bills that the government's promised to put into the House is the debt relief for university students and those with HECS debts, those that have a university degree. That will go through. There clearly needs to be something done about childcare in the country and the legitimacy and the accreditation and the training of some of the teachers following some of the horrific stories we heard out of Victoria and even some of the stuff in Queensland as well. So that will probably be the focus back on the domestic front. It would be domestic. The main thing is the main thing, and that's here at home for the Prime Minister before he turns to the challenge of getting that meeting with Donald Trump and getting over to the US, if that's what it means, at some stage in August, and then summit season when this all rolls around again and the challenge becomes international.
Charles, thank you so much for helping us make sense of all this in this upside-down world. Charles, thank you for joining us for today's Take.
Thanks, Jane.
That was 9 political editor Charles Croucher taking us on a whistle-stop tour of China and hopefully bringing you a greater understanding of what was at stake during the PM's visit this week and what else is at stake going forward. If you've enjoyed this episode of Today's Take, please give us a rating and a follow, have a listen to some previous episodes and join us back here again next week. I'm Jane Azzopardi. I'll see you bright and early with the rest of the team on Today. Until then, I hope you have a great day.